Hello, I'm Julie Levitt Learson for Fairfield University, and this is my lecture for the Honors 1101 course, What We Leave Behind. Today's topic is Fashions of the Romantic Era, roughly 1820 to 1840. And just to remind ourselves what the Romantic Era feels like at this time, right? So we're in the early 1800s, we're in the thick of the Industrial Revolution, which has created jobs and new products and an increasingly urban and mechanized way of life. This has created, for many people, a nostalgia for a lost way of life that was more rural and more tied to the land, and that's often viewed through an idealized lens. This is also at a time where people in Europe and America are embracing an increased sense of nationalism, the sense of tying their identity, the sense of belongingness being tied up with a country and viewing that country with a noble and storied history. It's also an artistic movement that is often referred to as Gothic revival, right? So we're harkening back to that storied past, which for Europeans would be the medieval era, which included the Gothic era. So fashions are going to have kind of a vertical emphasis at the start. They're going to have this vaguely medieval reference, and earth tones are going to be big. This idea of romanticism is kind of inspired as much by the ruins themselves, kind of covered in vines and bathed in sunset, dusky twilight tones, as the castles and cathedrals and tapestries themselves of this kind of vanished mythical past. So this is summing up, right? It's kind of a celebration of kind of quote old-fashioned values of piety and chivalry and femininity and this noble past. And so here are a couple of men that kind of typified that romantic aesthetic of the era. We're seeing Lord Byron from the United Kingdom and Eugène Delacroix from France. So Romanticism is all about rejecting the neoclassical ideas of order and logic and formality and instead embracing this passionate emotional depth. It's a rebellion against convention in art, certainly. And so men like Lord Byron and Eugene Delacroix, who were romantic in their writing and in their painting, were also kind of viewed as romantic in their aesthetic appearance. So there's this kind of sense of careful disarray and romantic unkemptness in men, right? And their fashions are going to kind of harken back to eras from the past. Artists and poets and musicians are really uplifted in this era as archetypes of the romantic male figure. They're dark, they're broody, and they're rebellious. People describe Lord Byron as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, and that pretty much sums up the romantic hero, right? Most actual men were much more conventional, but this is the ideal. So here is a fashion plate from Paris in the 1830s. Um, and this is showing us kind of the basic uniform of the coat, waistcoat, and pants with a shirt. And that kind of uniform for menswear is going to hold for the next century and a half. Most of the changes that we'll see in menswear will occur in the shape and color of these same basic elements over and over and over again. So what you can see here from this picture is that knee breeches are completely out of style, with one exception for like very stylized formal occasions and retained for servant livery in the great houses. Most of the time now, men are wearing pants, but check out these pants, right? See the guy on the right. You can see they're really nipped in at the waist, but full through the hips. They've got like some pleating going on, and then they're full through the thigh and the knee, and then they narrow back down at the ankle. And if you look very carefully on these men, you can see a strap that's going from the bottom of the pants underneath the boot to hold them in place. These are called Cossack trousers. They were inspired by a visit to England in 1814 by the Russian Tsar Alexander I and his retinue. And this is how they wore their pants, and this is quickly adapted into fashionable dress. As you can see, men's clothing is increasingly ready to wear. This is being, kind of manufactured and more off the rack rather than custom made piece by piece, man by man. Women's clothing is still custom made, but men's clothing is becoming more regulated. And England is becoming the center of menswear fashion. So here are some typical looks for menswear in the 1820s. On the left, we have a frock coat. On the right, we have a tailcoat. You can see he's also wearing those Cossack trousers. These are all items in the Victoria and Albert Museum, so I assume that they are English. The shirt underneath all this is similar to what we saw in the 18th century, but much less decorative. We've gotten rid of that jabot, that bosomy, frilly thing down the center. We've still got cravats in fashion, and as you can see, they're tied in different ways. Um, Tailcoats are cut straight across in the front at the waistline and then kind of squared off in the back at the knee. You can see um, sleeves have kind of volume at the shoulders and then they taper towards the wrist, and they are cuffless, continuing that trend from the late 18th century. And they've got wide collar and lapels. Both the frock coat and the tailcoat have wide lapels and wide collars covering the chest out to the shoulders. And you can see they're both double-breasted here, although they could also be single-breasted. You can see those trousers again, narrow at the waist, wide through the hips, and then narrow at the ankle. And a frock coat is rather full skirted, and the skirts of that frock coat fall to below the knee. So here you can see a couple of drawings. One is from a men's tailoring guide from the 1830s. And this is really, I wanted to focus on the silhouette here. So you can see, right, we've kind of got that hourglass going on with a male fashionable silhouette. Wide across the shoulders, those puffy sleeves are kind of helping to broaden out the shoulders, but a really tight nipped in waist and then kind of flowing out over the hips. The upper right-hand corner of this image you can see is a man's corset. This was a corset actually worn by Purser Thomas Chew, who served on the USS Constitution in Massachusetts. And so this corset is helping to kind of pull in the stomach under the ribs to create that narrowed waistline. And corsets were worn by some men throughout the 19th century. This is just one example. And as you can see, of course, this was ridiculed. This is a satirical print from a magazine. And as you can see, right, this is a dandy being dressed by his servants, and he's got a corset that's really lacing him tight, making his chest kind of overflow the top like a bosom, and he's got shoulder pads and he's got hip pads and he's got pads around his calves. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly an indication that this fashionable silhouette was a little bit artificial. Here we have some tailcoats from the 1830s to about 1840, English and American. But as you can see, the silhouette is shifting a little bit from the 1820s. The pants have settled down into a more flat front rather than all that pleating across the lap, and they're a straighter leg, right? So the volume has come down a little bit, and the tailcoat as well. Has slimmed down. The sleeves have lost a lot of that extra puffiness. So it's a sleeker, kind of more aerodynamic and a little bit more practical line. Same thing is going on with frock coats. You can see the hem of the frock coat has come up above the knee now to about mid-thigh, and the volume has gotten a little bit slimmer as well. And to me, the styles of the 1830s for menswear look just a lot more comfortable than those exaggerated hourglass shape of the 18. Here are some examples of men's waistcoats. We've got a waistcoat from the 1820s on the left, a fashion illustration of a men's waistcoat from about 1830 on the right, and in the middle is a men's waistcoat from about 1840. So you can see waistcoats are going to continue to be the more decorative element of man's dress, more so than the coat and pants. They are made out of more luxurious fabrics. These two extant garments appear both to be made of silk, and they're going to be, more highly decorative. We've got these colorful stripes here in the middle, and we have kind of a floral pattern on the left and the right. This would be called figured. They have little tiny figures, in this case, of flowers on them, but that could also apply to geometric shapes or other kind of repeat motifs. So as you can see, the kind of most peacocky element of a man's dress is his waistcoat. And we can see a variety of cuts and styles. You can see the waistcoats in these instances all have lapels, like a shawl collar, but they could be notched as well, or you could not have lapels, and also single and double breasted. And here are a couple of examples of men's hairstyles from this era. Um, the guy on the left is an unknown man from about 1830, and the man on the right is Armand Carrel, who was a rather famous newspaper journalist. His portrait is from about 1840. But you can see men's hair is longer than it was in the neoclassical period, and it is a little bit more wavy, curly, a little bit more carefully arranged in disarray. It's still short compared to 18th century styles, right? But it's framing the face. And we have this look of kind of like studied tousledness, like they've just been out in the winds on the moor or something like that. As far as facial hair goes, usually clean shaven chins with long sideburns. That tends to be the most popular look for this era, but mustaches and short whiskers are starting to appear on men's faces during this time. And here are a couple of examples of men's outerwear from the 1830s. The men on the left are wearing tailcoats and then a frock coat with top hats, right? And then on the right, they've got top coats over their coats. So you can see their coats are kind of long and a little bit boxy over those more tailored outfits underneath. The man in the brown on the left is wearing a coat, and then the man in the center is wearing a cape. They both stop at about the knee, right where the skirts of the tailcoat would end. And as you can see, with or without an overcoat, men are wearing top hats on their heads when they go outside. And they're also carrying walking sticks a lot of the times, and they wear gloves on their hands. Now, to turn towards women's wear and the romantic aesthetic for women, here are a couple of portraits. The portrait on the right is of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. On the left is a portrait of an unknown woman who we thought was Shelley from about 1830, but you can see they are dressed rather similarly. So during this time, middle class and upper class women are increasingly kept at home. And this kind of idea of women being the angel in the house, that women are hostesses and nurturers and raisers of the children and keepers of a stable home life while men go out into the world and conduct the business. Women are encouraged to engage in accomplishments like music and embroidery and fainting. And so women's fashions are designed to discourage or maybe even prevent physical exertion. There's this kind of delicate ephemeralness that is highly prized in women during this period. It's sometimes considered chic to look a little sickly, like you're delicate, like a breeze could knock you over. Of course, poor and working class women, none of this really applies to them. They've got to go out and earn a living. And so they have to be a little bit more robust. And their fashion is going to be much more practical because they have to do the physical exertion of their labor. And increasingly, a lot of that labor that lower class women are doing is in clothing and textile production, right? Because the Industrial Revolution has brought about this textile manufacturing. So we have mills that are turning fiber into cloth. And of course, in America and in other conquered territories around the globe, men and women are forced into labor to grow the plant crops that are going to be turned into textiles. Other things that are happening, we have machines that are producing cloth and lace and knits and trims and things like that. So as these articles of dress are increasingly mechanized in factories, there's less and less of the textile making being done at home. And this is making textiles more affordable, but of course, at what price from this labor? So here are a few of early to mid 1820s day dresses. This is an era where women in particular start dressing differently at different times of the day. This dress here on the left-hand side is actually an archery dress, which presumably means this is an outfit that a woman wore to go shoot bows and arrows for fun and exercise. The outfit in the middle is actually a 1820s pelisse, right? So it's that coat that goes over a dress. And then the outfit on the right is a day dress worn by a woman during the day, but probably at home. So what you can see here is we're starting to stray from that straight up and down, really minimalist neoclassical column. The waist is still high. We've still got kind of that empire waist going on, but we're starting to experiment. You know, this dress here on the left, you can see kind of puffs and slashes, and a little bit kind of like imitation dagging, kind of calling back that Gothic look. You can see a little bit of that too on the collar of the police. We have kind of that dagging happening. And then on the white gown on the right, we've kind of got those sleeves like the Italian Renaissance Virago sleeves. And we have what appears to be kind of an imitation or a throwback to the Tudor ruff. So we're kind of playing with lots of different styles all here at once. Here are some evening dresses from the 1820s. 1823 to 1827. The one on the left is from the Netherlands, one in the center is from Russia, the one on the right is English. So you can see, right, the similar styles kind of working their way throughout Europe and into America as well. So that neoclassical Greek column dress is starting to evolve into something fuller and frillier. You can see the skirts are taking on a wider shape at the bottom, that hem is widening out, and there's a little bit more stiffness to these dresses than that muslin column dress of the true neoclassical period. We've got some puffy sleeves. We've got some trim on these gowns, and notice that the trim on all of these gowns is like three-dimensional. Lots of different kinds of trim on each of these, but it's kind of architectural, right? To me, it looks like icing on a cake, but it's a really kind of like throwback to that Rococo sensibility, kind of almost reflecting those architectural details, but in some ways, you know, repeating ideas. If you think back to like to the Madame de Pompadour dress from the Rococo. And another thing that maybe you can notice is that waistline is starting to creep down from right under the bosom from the empire waist. As we move on in time, these are day dresses from the late 1820s. That silhouette starts to change even more. The wide lace collar on the lady on the right, that's kind of reminiscent of the falling ruff from that Cavalier period. We've also got those puffy sleeves and a tight waist from the Cavalier period as well, right? We're no longer that column, we're starting to define the waist. So that waistline is coming down closer to the natural waistline, although it's not quite there yet. You can also see we've got these wide puffy sleeves. The skirts are getting a little bit shorter. We can see her ankles almost on the right-hand side. Um, and we're wearing bonnets, and those bonnets are getting bigger and wider and foofier. Then here are some evening gowns from about 1830. Um, American on the left. The one in the middle is a fashion illustration from which I bet the lady on the left got her inspiration. And then on the right is an 1830 ball gown that I believe is from the Manchester Museum of Art. So you can see again, right, skirts are getting fuller, those puff sleeves are getting bigger, and the hair is getting higher. We are getting far away from that Greek column. So let's talk a little bit about some hairstyles. We've got hair parted in the center with these ringlets or braids on the sides, and then we've got a lot of height in the back. Um, these are two ladies, Princess Feodora of Leiningen and the Countess Holstein in Germany. So these are both ladies from different German principalities, but this kind of style is being worn throughout Europe by ladies. And we have these kind of elaborate updos for evening wear, where the hair becomes very kind of architectural in a very different way from what it was doing in the 18th century. But we've still got these, you know, flowers and feathers and ribbons being stuck in there, really turning the hair into kind of a sculpture work of art. Um, and then during the day, bonnets. When you go outside, you must cover your hair. So the hair has to be smaller and closer to the head in order for that bonnet to fit over it. Now, as this shape changes, as the silhouette changes, we have to have new understructures to hold that shape. So We have the return of a boned bodice worn underneath. Now we're calling these corsets instead of stays. As you can see, this one, right, we're kind of really nipping that waist in, and then the corset itself extends far below the waistline, and kind of like evenly around the body over the hips. So we're kind of keeping the hips under control as well as the waist. And what's a little bit different is that we kind of have two distinct breasts with this corset as opposed to kind of like a mono boob, like prow of a ship that we had going on with the stays of the 18th century. To help hold those skirts out, we have these petticoats, and I'm showing you two examples here. Um, the the horizontal lines around the bottom of these petticoats, this is done by cording. So there's a length of rope inside each of those little ripples in the petticoat, and that's helping to hold the shape out. And then lastly, to hold those puffy sleeves in place, women are wearing sleeve plumpers that just get like put on underneath your sleeve. Sometimes they're attached to the corset and sometimes they are not. And they will vary in size and shape according to the dress that you need to put on over it. As we move on into the 1830s, day dresses for women, you can see the lady on the left. This is a cotton calico print that was probably uh, designed manufactured in India, or possibly imported cotton from India that was then woven and printed in an English mill or even an American mill, because this is from the New York Metropolitan Museum. On the right, that looks more like a silk, but notice the change in the silhouette. We've gotten very wide across the top again. We've kind of lost that vertical Gothic spire kind of idea. And we're going more back towards that 17th century Baroque kind of wide drooping shoulders look. We've got those big puffy sleeves that we call these sleeves the gigot sleeves. Um, and to me, these sleeves kind of harken back to the male Tudor silhouette, right? But instead of that symbol of masculine virility from the 16th century, now this is kind of a hallmark of feminine delicacy. And then we've got that collar across the top that's echoing that falling ruff from the 17th century and the sloping shoulders from the 17th century as well. So again, we're mixing periods. The other thing that's happening is look at all of the fabric in that skirt. The skirt's getting really, really full again. But it's a single skirt over layers of petticoats as opposed to that split skirt that's open to show an underskirt underneath. And here's another fashion plate. It's important to remember that during this era, fashion magazines and other printed materials are getting more widely distributed. So women from different parts of the world can look at an image and say, oh, this is what's in style. I want this. France is the style center, and lots of times women are trying to copy the Parisian styles, which these are here from about 1835. But again, look at all the kind of mishmash of styles that are going on. We've got that sense of the falling ruff, we've got the bonnet, we've got the flowers down the like mock split skirt. That's not a split skirt, but those little flowers going down the sides of it are kind of making the optical illusion that it is a split skirt from the Rococo period. We have that kind of ribbon lacing across the front that kind of is harkening back to lacing from centuries earlier. And then check out her headdress on the right hand side. If that doesn't remind you of an English gabled hood, I don't know what. Now, these collars sort of gain in size and volume, and they take on this kind of distinct shape that covers over these wide gigot sleeves and then come to points in the front and then kind of fan out across the back. And this little capelet collar thing is called a pelerine. And it could be practical for outerwear or it could be purely decorative like these, carefully embroidered linen and lace ones are. Again, here are some more fashion plates from the Court magazine from the mid 1830s. These are for evening gowns. You can see that droopy shouldered, wide gigot sleeve look and nipped in waist and wide bellying out skirt. That silhouette is continuing here. Hair is getting a little less architectural, but still, full of decorative little flourishes. And we have here on the right this kind of like en coeur neckline, sweetheart neckline, where the neckline is kind of delicately recreating the shape of a heart, turning the between the neckline and the pointed bodice at the waist. We're getting that little kind of suggestion of a heart shape on the bodice. So these skirts, as they get wider too, they need lots of petticoats underneath. So that corded petticoat isn't going to do it. We need 3 or 4 of them, and that would be really heavy with cording. So instead of cording, we're starting to starch the petticoats to make them stiff to hold that shape. Here are a couple of examples of outerwear. That pelisse is no longer practical given how much space the skirts of these gowns are taking and how wide those sleeves are. It's just not really practical to wear a coat. So capes and shawls are pretty much what women are wearing to cover up their gowns when they go outside, and of course, bonnets. So in that last slide, we had a lovely vintage photograph of women from the period and an existing garment from the period. Here are fashion plates from the same time. So you can kind of see, right? We have the ideal in the fashion plate and then what actual people actually wear. And there is sometimes a little bit of a drift, right? Just like there is today. So you can see too, right? We've got lots of different styles of bonnets and lots of different styles of capes and capelets. And then here on the right-hand side, this is kind of an attempt at a coat, but as you can see, like this is taking up an awful lot of fabric and an awful lot of tailoring. Um, and I think most women ended up with something more of a true cape or a shawl. And as we head towards the 1840s, the undergarments are changing a little bit to accommodate. So you can see this corset, right, has shortened up past the waistline. We have that V point again, and we've got kind of that mono boob look going again. Still rather tightly, not super tight, but trying to get that hourglass shape, the nipped in waist. And you can see the fuller petticoats. We don't have any more cording, but this petticoat would be starched to hold out those wide skirts. And you can see the decorative hem. This is probably manufactured eyelet trim, not done meticulously by hand anymore, but something provided to us by a textile mill. Now we're in the late 1830s. So the dresses are kind of letting this print do most of the decoration. There isn't a lot of trimming on these gowns. The gown shape, right, kind of the drapes and folds are doing the decorating, and the arrangement of the printed fabric is doing that. You can see this dress on the right where the stripes in the fabric as printed are cut and then sewn together in a way to make those kind of V-shaped details on the bodice. And then we've got the printed floral on the left with a little bit of gathering at the neckline to create some interest. And then there's a little bit trim just at the edges of the bodice and then a little foof down the side of that skirt. Other thing you've probably noticed is that the puffs on those sleeves have shrunk a little bit, but they've moved further down the arm, off the shoulder, onto the forearm and below the elbow as well, before coming to a tight end at the wrist. And you can see we've still got those sloping shoulders on, and check out how the cuts of these gowns are going to make it really hard for a woman to lift her arms above her head to do any meaningful labor. Now, as I mentioned, this is by design. Um, we have this greater sense of feminine modesty and piety. So this is being reflected in these kind of plainer shapes. You've probably also noticed a kind of higher neckline and more filled in neckline like this dress on the left. It kind of is kind of an echo of that fichu from bygone days. Now this skirt seems to be kind of harkening back to that split skirt design of the 18th century and kind of some of those wider sleeves. Um, and then the dress on the right is a single skirt, not split open, and then little puffs that end at the elbow. So a variety of different styles going on here, but the silhouette is basically the same. So this is that kind of mystique of the angel in the house. Um, so the bodice is getting even tighter at the waist, but very modest through the bosom area. And they're developing a sharper point to further emphasize that small waist. You can kind of see that on the gown on the right-hand side. Still got that feminine shoulder happening, but now a lot of volume has been taken out of those sleeves. But the skirt is continuing to really bell out. And then you can see this kind of overall sense of feminine modesty going on. And the ladies in the portrait here on the left, this is an 1842 portrait of the Bronte sisters, who were, women authors of some of the most famous romantic novels. And though they broke barriers in the publishing world, their kind of public personae, they were viewed as the epitome of feminine delicacy and demureness and shyness and kind of like reticence to be public figures. And women's hairstyles at this time are reflecting that same sense of kind of demure, quiet, piety and simplicity. Lady on the left, the photograph, it's an unknown woman. And then the lady on the right is the Grand Duchess Alexandra of Russia, and these are both around 1840. So you can see hair parted in the center, it's coiled around the back of the head, and then we have some ringlets by the ears by Our Lady in the photograph, or this kind of braid that comes in front of the ear and then gets coiled up behind the head. That hairstyle was one that was popularized by Queen Victoria. She was a young woman through the Regency era. She became queen in 1837 after England had been ruled by two kind of playboy kings, George IV and George V. They had relatively short reigns. The king before them, George III, was often incapacitated due to his mental illness. So there's kind of like not really been a stabilizing force in the monarchy. And Queen Victoria reigns for more than 60 years and kind of restores the sense of dignity to the monarchy and really creates a family friendly public persona. She kind of becomes mother to the nation. So, as I said, she becomes queen in 1837. She marries Prince Albert of Saxe-Gothenburg in 1840. And because she reigns so long and because she has such a lasting impression on the culture, and because England really dominates world politics during her reign, we are being ushered into the Victorian era, which will be the topic of our next lecture. I wanted to leave you here with these images, a portrait from her wedding and then her actual wedding gown that was at the Museum of Kent, with a recreation of her bridal headpiece. One other thing that she popularized was the idea of brides wearing white gowns. So there she is. But even here, you can see she's got this mid 18th century silhouette going on, but the sleeves do look a little bit Marie Antoinette to me, with the puffs to the elbow and then the lace kind of falling cuff, right? She's got that pointed basque waist again, and in this beautiful white silk that was manufactured in English textile mills.